My parents handed my golden child brother a check for $60,000 to cover his down payment on a 4-bedroom suburban home, then turned to me, scoffed, and said, "You're independent, Clara. Just go rent somewhere small." They expected me to break down, cry, or beg for a fraction of their generosity. Instead, I forced a tight smile, walked out of their house, and took every single dollar I had saved working 70-hour weeks in commercial real estate management. I didn't just rent an apartment, I bought my first multifamily property. Then, I leveraged it to buy another. And another. 3 years later, when my brother's reckless spending caught up with him and he smugly asked if he could crash at my house to save cash, I looked him dead in the eye, took a slow sip of coffee, and replied, "Which one?" My name is Clara. At 32 years old, I'm a senior commercial real estate auditor and asset manager, a career built on blood, sweat, and late-night accounting books. But in my parents' house, none of those achievements mattered. My younger brother Ethan was their undisputed golden boy, a man who blew through every allowance, crashed 2 cars, and treated responsibility like an optional suggestion. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Sunday evening during a family dinner. Ethan was bragging about finding a sprawling $500,000 suburban property. Right between the main course and dessert, my father reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a certified cashier's check for $60,000, and slid it across the dining table toward Ethan. To help our golden boy start his legacy, my father announced proudly. I sat frozen, watching Ethan's smug grin widen. I had been saving for 5 years, desperately trying to secure a deposit for a modest starter unit. I looked at my mother and softly asked if they could help me with even a fraction of that amount. My mother let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Clara, don't be greedy," she scoffed. "You're strong, stubborn, and independent. Just go rent somewhere small. Your brother needs the head start." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply picked up my purse, left the dinner table, and walked out into the cold night air, leaving them to celebrate a favor that was about to cost them everything. That cold Sunday night marked the end of my desire for my parents' approval. The very next morning, I took the bitterness in my chest and channeled it straight into my work. While Ethan was busy driving around in a brand new sports sedan and bragging to his friends about his new suburban 4-bedroom house, I was pulling 70-hour weeks at my commercial auditing firm. I cut every non-essential expense from my life. I skipped vacations, packed my lunches, and lived in a tiny, bare-bones rental studio on the edge of town. Ethan and my parents genuinely believed I was drowning in bills and wallowing in self-pity. Whenever my mother called, her voice was dripping with condescending sympathy. She would remind me how lucky Ethan was to have a permanent home while asking if I was managing to keep up with rent. I never corrected her. I let them believe I was struggling. In reality, my years of analyzing commercial properties and tracking asset portfolios had given me a massive advantage that money alone couldn't buy. 18 months after that infamous dinner, I spotted a distressed multifamily triplex on the market. The owner was desperate to sell, and the building needed cosmetic repairs that most buyers were terrified to tackle. Using every single dollar of my hard-earned savings, alongside my pristine credit score, I closed the deal. I moved into the smallest basement unit, spent my weekends painting and renovating, and rented out the upper 2 units. Their monthly rent payments completely covered my mortgage, property taxes, and insurance, leaving me living for free while generating positive cash flow. I didn't brag on social media. I didn't post photos holding keys. I kept my head down and quietly formed an independent corporate shield, a private holding company, to manage my growing assets. 2 years later, using the forced equity and cash flow from the first property, I purchased a second multifamily building, followed quickly by a small commercial storefront on a bustling downtown street. Meanwhile, Ethan's financial house of cards was rapidly disintegrating. Having been handed $60,000 without ever learning the discipline of earning it, he treated his home like an endless credit line. He took out high-interest home equity loans to fund lavish vacations, expensive electronics, and elite country club memberships. By year 3, his reckless spending caught up with him, and his bank served him with a formal notice of default. He was facing catastrophic foreclosure, completely oblivious to the fact that his quiet sister was building a real estate empire right under his nose. The reckoning arrived on a humid Saturday afternoon at my parents' house during an emergency family meeting. My mother had called me earlier that morning, her voice laced with a strange, demanding urgency that immediately raised my red flags. When I stepped into the living room, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. Ethan sat on the leather sofa, his head buried in his hands, looking smaller and paler than I had ever seen him. My father was pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor, clutching a stack of urgent bank notices printed in bold red lettering. His bank was initiating foreclosure proceedings on his suburban 4-bedroom home. Ethan had defaulted on 3 consecutive mortgage payments and maxed out his high-interest credit lines. My parents had already drained their own liquid retirement savings trying to keep his head above water, but the bank was demanding the entire past due balance immediately. Instead of taking responsibility, my father turned his sharp glare directly onto me. Ethan needs to list his house immediately to avoid a public judgment, my father announced, his tone shifting into that familiar, unearned authority. While the property is on the market, he's going to move out to save cash. Clara, since you're just renting a small place, you need to let your brother move in with you rent-free for the next 6 months. Family sacrifices for family. I sat quietly, watching the sheer entitlement radiate off them. My mother chimed in, offering a tight, patronizing smile. It's only fair, Clara. You've been living alone, saving your little salary. Ethan is going through a terrible crisis, and you have a spare bedroom in your rental anyway. It's time you step up and support your brother. Ethan looked up from the couch, a faint, familiar smirk returning to his lips. He leaned back, crossing his arms with an unbearable air of arrogance. Yeah, Clara, he said condescendingly. I'll pack my bags this weekend. I'll take the master bedroom in your house so I can set up my office, and you can take the smaller room. It'll help me get back on my feet. I took a slow, deliberate sip from my glass of water, letting the silence stretch across the living room until every eye was locked onto me. I set the glass down with a soft click, looked Ethan dead in the eye, and asked smoothly, "Which one?" Ethan blinked, his smirk instantly freezing. "What do you mean, which one?" he snapped, irritated. "Your house. The place you're renting." I leaned back, resting my hands calmly in my lap, and replied, "I don't rent, Ethan. I own 3 properties. So if you're asking to crash at my house, you're going to have to be a lot more specific." The silence that followed in my parents' living room was so heavy you could hear the wall clock ticking. My father let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh, shaking his head with a look of pure contempt. "Stop making up absurd lies to protect your pride, Clara," he barked, waving a dismissive hand. "You work an office job. There is no way you own 3 properties when you couldn't even afford a starter home 3 years ago." Without saying a word, I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a sleek blue presentation folder. I tossed it onto the glass coffee table, right in front of my mother's wide eyes. Inside were certified land registry deeds, corporate filing documents for my private holding company, and tax assessment statements for all 3 of my locations, my triplex, my second residential multifamily building, and my commercial storefront downtown. My mother's hands trembled as she opened the folder, her face draining of all color as her eyes scanned the golden seals and legal stamps bearing my full name as sole owner. Ethan snatched the paperwork from her, frantically flipping through the pages as if searching for a typo. This is impossible," he stammered, his voice cracking with pure panic. "How did you get the money for all this? While you were spending $60,000 of mom and dad's money on fancy trips and cars, I was living off pennies, renovating buildings, and investing every dime I earned," I replied, my voice cool and unwavering. Then came the real twist. Ethan's eyes stopped on the final document, a commercial lease agreement for my downtown storefront. The tenant listed on the contract was a regional private mortgage firm. That exact firm was the secondary lender currently initiating the foreclosure process on Ethan's home. My holding company was literally their commercial landlord. "So not only can you not move into my properties," I said, leaning forward and meeting my brother's terrified gaze, "but your lender pays me rent every single month. I have spent 3 years building an independent life away from your constant disrespect. I owe you nothing." My father stood frozen, his arrogant authority completely shattered. My mother looked at me with a desperate, sudden sweetness, trying to reach for my hand, but I pulled away cleanly. "Before we see how this family showdown completely ended, I want to ask everyone watching right now, what would you have done if your family treated you like an afterthought for years? Would you have helped them, or walked away like I did?" Drop a comment below with the city you're watching from so I can see how far our story has reached. The aftermath of that afternoon was swift, clinical, and completely devastating for my family. Without my financial intervention or permission to move into my properties, Ethan's house of cards completely collapsed. He was forced to short sell his 4-bedroom suburban home at a massive loss to avoid a public foreclosure judgment. He moved into a cramped, noisy 1-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, finally forced to take a second job just to pay off his remaining credit card debts. My parents were left completely humiliated. The $60,000 they had eagerly handed to their golden child as a down payment vanished into thin air, an investment completely wiped out by Ethan's reckless entitlement. My mother tried calling me dozens of times over the following weeks, leaving tearful, apologetic voicemails claiming it had all been a terrible misunderstanding. But I knew the truth. Her sudden remorse wasn't about missing her daughter, it was about realizing they had backed the wrong child. I set strict, permanent boundaries. I blocked their numbers and refused to allow their toxic dynamic back into my world. Today, my real estate portfolio continues to thrive, generating reliable passive income that guarantees my total independence. Sitting on the balcony of my penthouse unit, looking out over the city skyline, I feel a profound sense of peace. Standing up to my family didn't just protect my wealth, it gave me my freedom. What would you have done if your parents handed your sibling everything while telling you to just figure it out? Would you have given them a second chance, or walked away for good? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.